Okay, my name is Everline Cheruta, and I come from Kenya. So you can say I have a long journey to the monastery. And that means I'm just going to be very brief. So originally in Kenya, I was a missionary Benedictine sisters, and then I went back home to go and discern. And that is a place where I came to know Sister Mary David. She's still a very great friend to the missionary Benedictine sisters. And when I was back at home, when I was discerning, is when I started getting in touch with Sister Mary David. And that's how I ended up in this monastery. Yeah, so I'm happy to be here. Thank you and welcome. Okay, in Kenya, when I went back, I was born in the farm. And when I went back home from religious life, I went and continued working in the farm. So I used to keep cows, sheep, and chicken, and then planting corn and having my small vegetable garden. So I was a real farmer. Yeah.
What are you doing now?
Now I'm a student. I'm a student at Etude. Yeah.
What are you studying?
So I'm majoring in religious studies. Yeah.
Everline is modest because she doesn't tell you she was what we used to call being on the honor roll. So her grades were very high, and she's a wonderful student, and she blesses us. I'm Joanne Kolash. I think we're talking about how we became a sister, correct? Okay. When I was in 10th grade, I felt a calling to religious life because of a personal relationship that I had with Jesus. And this was not a hard decision because I was raised in a very strong Catholic family, went to Catholic schools all my life, except for a course or two at the university. But by the grace of God, I waited 6 more years before I entered the community. So I was about 15 when I had this experience, and I was 21, almost 22, when I entered the community, which gave me time to date, have fun, grow up, mature, have a job, all sorts of things. And finally, I decided either I go now or I don't go. So, Joanne, you better get going. And that's what brought me to community. And of course, I found my calling, and I have looked back a time or two when it became really hard. But most of the time, I knew this was where I belonged, and I loved it. And this community has provided every avenue of challenge. I've traveled a great deal throughout the world, really. So I know Holy Wisdom Monastery isn't just this place on the hill for a few chosen people. We have an accounting to our publics and to our world. And I'm very grateful to come and welcome new members. Rex Percy, who was a United Church of Christ minister, said one time when I thanked him for coming, he said, Holy Wisdom Sunday Assembly is a special community. And I agree. Only one more thing. When people say Holy Wisdom is a good place, I say it's a good place because good people come here. Is that you, Dennis, up there, watching this? Thank you so much, dear friend. Thank you. Dennis is a retired priest, and yeah, it's hard for me to stop talking.
Is this for real?
My name is Mary David Walgenbach. I come from Iowa, a small town called Hospers in northwest Iowa, settled by a lot of Dutch, a few Germans, and one or two Italians. I went to a public high school, which was like a parochial school. Every morning, the teachers would take turns reading from the scriptures. And because my parents went there, they said, you are going to stand when they say the Our Father, even though there are a few words that are different. And so we did that. The high school in a small town was very important to the small town. Each small town that was 10, 15 miles away all had a high school, all had teachers who took turns reading the scriptures and saying the Our Father until they consolidated all those schools probably 20 years after I graduated. But they were the life of the town. Everybody owned the children, no matter what denomination you were. And there were 4 churches for 600 people. First Reformed, Christian Reformed, Presbyterian, and Roman Catholic. So after high school, I went to nurses training, where our sisters had a hospital in Sioux City, Iowa. And then I told my parents I was going to join that community, and they said, I think you ought to wait a while. So I gave them 1 year, and then I came to Madison, Wisconsin, and I was the first person to enter this community here because most of the sisters came from Sioux City, Iowa, where they were there for 70 years, and they came here in 1953. And I and another sister were the first ones to enter here. So I celebrated this year 60 years of my monastic profession. I've been prioress for about 35 years, 38 years maybe. So I've seen a lot of changes. Our community has been very progressive in many ways. Our older sisters, we inherited that. So it's good to be here. It's good to see you all. Thank you.
I want one little.
Because we've been together most of the years that we've both been here. The first time her family came to visit, they got ready to leave, and we were standing in this very room. Her dad was crying, her mom was crying, her little brother was 5 years old, tugging at her, saying, Nani, please don't cry, please don't cry. And her sister was crying, and I said, she will never stay.
Should I turn it off?
Hi, I'm Sister Lynne. I grew up in Freeport, Illinois, which is south of Monroe. And the first time I came across sisters was when I was in grade school. I used to walk home by a Catholic grade school because I'm Presbyterian. And I saw sisters in full habit out directing the kids. And so when I was in junior high, I said to my mother one day, I think I'd like to be a nun when I grow up. And she said, oh, that's ridiculous because you're not Catholic. I didn't know that, but what I saw was there were women who were active in a church, and I was religious and that was important to me. So fast forward, after college, I became a Presbyterian minister, well, college and seminary. And in my first pastorate, which was in Dodge City, Kansas, I decided to make a retreat and went to a Catholic retreat center in Salina, Kansas. There I met another set of sisters who were not in habit, and I thought, could I live in community with, and I thought, no, because I'm not Catholic. So I eventually went back to graduate school, and in one of my courses there, we studied the Rule of Benedict, and I was really taken by it. still, I didn't know any Benedictines. And we'll get our technology going here. About 8 years after that retreat, which had a profound impact on me, my faith moved from my head to my heart, and my spirituality really became more contemplative. So then, about 8 years later, I saw some ads for our community. We were becoming ecumenical, and this was before internet. I needed to see 3 ads before I responded. But the line that caught my attention was, we welcome women of any Christian denomination. And then I saw Benedictine there, and I thought, oh, I have to check this out. So I was living in Iowa at that time, serving a church, and I came here on a 6-day retreat and fell in love with the prayers. I love to sing, and we sing our prayers. I had been using the Psalms for prayer. That's what we use in our prayer. I love to be outdoors and to work outside. My denomination, we'd been working ecumenically, and so that resonated with me. There was just so much resonance. And I was at a time in my spiritual life when I thought, I need community, a group of people, in order to go deeper. So this seemed like a possibility. And I started getting into conversation with the sisters and discernment, and after almost 2 years, moved here in 1998. I made my first profession in 2000 and my final profession in 2004. And it's a place that fits me, where I can grow and serve. And so I'm really grateful to be here, and I'm grateful that you are here as well. Thanks.
My name is Denise West, and I first came here in 2015. I was teaching preschool in New York City. I taught in New York overall, sort of on and off, about 15 or 16 years, something like that. But I was raised in Memphis, Tennessee. But I went to graduate school in New York, and I was working there and beginning to sort of burn out as a teacher. And I had been, well, I'm sort of not telling this in the right order, but I'm going to go with it. So I was feeling like I needed some spiritual depth. I'd been attending church in New York, a member of a church for about 10 years, and when I first went there, I didn't grow up Christian. I grew up in a very secular household. Started going to church in my 30s, and the church I eventually joined was the Riverside Church in New York, which is interdenominational, and I felt very at home there, very welcomed. They welcomed my questions. That's like one of the most important things. They welcomed questions, because I started going to church seeking community and wanting to say I believe in God, but I didn't even know what I meant by that. It just very much was a desire for a faith life, a desire for something other than my sort of cynical kind of world that I lived in. So I started going to the Bible study class, which sounds even funny to my ears now, because growing up in the South, Bible study was a certain thing that someone's saying, yeah, I know what you're talking about. But we read scripture. They had twice-a-year retreats, spiritual retreats, which were so formative to me, just a place where I could really open up and let my guard down and really get to know people and allow love to enter me in a deeper way, be more vulnerable. After about 10 years, one of the ministers who was sort of leading this more contemplative spiritual path retired. And so there was a sort of kind of a hole there. Like I was looking for something deeper, but my church, it was very much a social justice church. I mean, I loved it. I loved that church. We had a new pastor who I loved, but I was feeling like I need more. So I was also thinking about what else could I do instead of teaching, because I loved teaching, but I kind of hated teaching aspects of it. I loved the kids and all. So I started Googling, and I found the 6-month program here, Benedictine Sojourners. And this, I had a sort of a revelation at the Easter sermon in 2015. It was Pastor Amy, and she was preaching on, I think it was the Gospel of Mark, and the women came to the tomb. And I remember the message, the way I remember it was, the women came to the tomb and they were amazed and terrified. And that wasn't the end of the story. That's what I remember. And I thought that, I felt that way. I felt terrified, but a kind of a amazement at something, at being drawn to a deeper life of faith. And I thought, I need to do something. I've got to change my life somehow, because I'm not living the life that I want to be living. So I Googled, I found this program here at the monastery for 6 months, and it started in September. And I thought, oh, and I saw photographs of the prairie, and they were showing a Thomas Merton film, and I was just like, oh my goodness, I just knew I was going to come here to visit. So I said, okay, I'm going to quit my job at the end of the year, and in September, instead of coming back to school, I'm going to go live in a monastery for 6 months. And that's what, I came for a weekend, then I came for 2 weeks in the summer. So I did that. I came for 6 months in 2015. And despite going to church, being a member for 10 years, I hadn't been baptized, just because, I don't know, commitment phobia, perhaps. Anyway, Sister Lynne baptized me at the Easter Vigil in 2016. It was just beautiful. And then soon after that, I went back to New York. I had an apartment and I had cats, and I thought, now I'm ready to go live the life that I meant to live, and, wait for a call of what that will be. But after about a month and a half, I realized I just missed it here so much. So I wrote back and asked if I could return. And I remember Lynne said, okay, let me, we'll see. And then she wrote back a few days later, do you mean like for discernment? I said, well, I guess so. So I came back, and just eventually, I never wanted to leave, and that gradually became actively wanting to stay and really growing roots and really growing more and more in love with this life. And I'm also so grateful for Mary David and Joanne's work to make this a monastery where someone like myself can join. And that's my story. I think I probably took Evelyn's leftover minutes at least.
Sharing your stories, and as we can see, there are many roads to Holy Wisdom. Next topic, how did Holy Wisdom Monastery become an ecumenical home for Sunday Assembly and for the sisters' community?
I would like to talk about this for maybe a day or two. But I'm going to try to keep it only to a couple of minutes, because I want Mary David to be able to say something, and the other sisters, and we have 10 minutes. But there are really 5 turning points, I think, that I chose. Going back to Vatican Council II, it was called an ecumenical council by Pope John, good Pope John, in 1962 to 65. There was a decree on ecumenism The sisters in those days were still very obedient. And so they started reading all these decrees, and then we started putting them into practice. Our community especially was small, and we could do that. There is in the Benedictine setup the autonomy of each monastery, even though we do come together in federations. So Vatican Council II, the decree on ecumenism, was very important in our community. The second thing was my own personal trip to Montgomery, Alabama for civil rights. And I went with campus workers from the University of Wisconsin. Two of them became good friends. One was a Lutheran minister, the other was a UCC minister. But the turning point for me was when the Lutheran minister pulled out the bread that his wife had prepared for the trip, and he said, "Would you like some? Did you have dinner?" And I said, "No, I didn't." So he blessed the bread, broke it, and gave me a piece. And for me, that was Eucharist. That was Jesus giving himself in a situation. And then life was never quite the same for me. That was about 1965. There's more to that story, but I'm not going to go into that because of our lack of time, but some of you know it. Okay, the third thing was the monks of Taizé, a community from France that is an ecumenical community. They had students at the University of Wisconsin. They wanted to come out here for retreats. We said, yes, you can come. So I was principal of the high school at the time. We were teaching from Monday to Friday, and from Friday to a Sunday afternoon, we were doing retreats with the monks of Taizé. So to make the story really short, I said to the sisters, something has to give. We can't, as a community, do both these ministries. Which one fits us best? And we come together, what we call chapter. We all have a voice. Some of us have a vote. It's not, well, the yeses win and the noes don't. It's try to reach consensus. And the consensus was, let us close the school and open a retreat center for Christians of any denomination, or Christians or people of no religious denomination. Well, I hasten to tell you that in the Catholic Church, this was seen as pretty heretical. And in fact, the State Journal had an essay saying by the religious writer that the nuns jumped over the cliff. In 1965, can you believe, we were considering closing our high school and having a retreat and conference center for Christian, Jews, people of no faith, and that's precisely what we did. Mary David is going to pick up on that, but there's one more important detail that I should have said before. I'm going on my 92nd birthday, so it's not quite as clear as things used to be. Anyway, it was called Interfaith Dialogue. And clergy, there were about, what would you say, 12, 15, maybe more?
25. Maybe.
25, yeah, who would come every week. I'm sorry. Every week, and they would choose a topic. They were Catholic, Protestant, and they could say interfaith because there was a rabbi Rabbi Swazinski, and some of you probably know of him. He was a wonderful man. And so those people prayed with us. We invited them to come on Friday to midday prayer, our midday prayer on Friday, which is scripture and the Psalms. They came. And so this interfaith group went to our bishop and said, we think St. Benedict Center would be a wonderful place for a retreat and conference center for people of any Christian denomination. And Bishop William Patrick O'Connor, God bless him, gave his blessing. And we opened St. Benedict Center in 1966.
Thank you, Joanne. Those were very significant points. As we continue to pray, invite people to pray with us. And in the 60s, after Vatican II, Protestants were also eager to come and see what Roman Catholics were all about, especially very few of them had been into the sisters' community and prayed with them. So that grew because we had Methodists and Presbyterians and United Church of Christ and Lutherans for those years. And we also experimented with community because another significant document in Vatican II was the adaptation and renewal of religious life for not only sisters, but for monks and priests, etc. And so again, sisters did that. They said, well, study the scriptures and go back to the spirit of your founder. Well, reading again the rule of St. Benedict, which is really an invitation to community. And no matter who the guest comes, you are to receive the guest as Christ. And so here we had all these Protestant people coming, and we said, yes, they're Christ. But because we were still regulated under canon law, we could not invite these people to the Eucharist, and we had daily Eucharist. So we said, well, no, we're separated brethren or sisters in that time, and we can't really. Well, we did that for a year, and then the sister said, you know, we can't say that anymore because we pray with them. We pray their prayers. They pray ours. They help us with dishes. We have softball games, etc., etc. Well, we're just going to say it's up to you. It's up to the Holy Spirit. So that lasted for the next 30 years. And then we had the Lutheran Church, the ALC and the LCA, it was before the merger, and Missouri Synod had a summer institute for mission, meaning that young people were going to the foreign missions to teach English as a second language, as well as retired men and women, as well as ministers and their wives and their minister, and children. We had two buildings then, this building and the larger one on the hill that we took down in 2006. So that Summer Institute for Mission was 5 weeks. So we had maybe 55 people here with little kids, with young people, with older folks, all preparing to go to the missions. And they had professors from the university who would come out and teach about the different cultures of the countries they were going to. There was childcare for the kids, and we all ate in one dining room. The ministers helped with, not just the ministers, everybody helped, had a dish crew. We had a softball team. We just did wonderful things together besides prayer. And somebody said to us after we then started the mission of becoming ecumenical, working through our federation, we said, what changed you to become ecumenical? We said praying with people, praying with other people. praying our prayers, praying their prayers, reading the scriptures, hearing the scriptures in a new way. There's one baptism. What does that really mean? So long story short, in 1990, we started petitioning the federation that we belong to, saying we want to become permanently ecumenical so that religious women of other denominations can become part of Benedictines. And that lasted 14 years. In 2006, we then received our non-canonical status. And of course, we had a couple bishops that didn't look kindly upon all of this. And so we could no longer have a Roman Catholic Mass here, but in our congregation was a resigned married priest, a UCC minister, was a very good friend. We called him our Protestant monk. And so we started having an ecumenical Eucharist, etc. Now I have to quit. So that's how we got, that's the beginnings, and that continues to grow.
Is there time?
We are actually now a little after 11, so.
Okay, so I'll just add a little bit to that story because I came here in 1998 when the sisters were in the middle of the process of becoming ecumenical. And so at that time in Sunday Assembly, we had a Roman Catholic priest. Father Ken Smits was a Capuchin who was the presider and working in liturgy. So the sisters had worked with him, and he was very open. You could say he worked with the sisters, and he wrote Eucharistic prayers that we were using because we were wanting to worship in inclusive language. So that was one of the first changes that was made. It was already made when I came. It was a lovely thing to come and worship and not have to fool with the language in your head, you know, to feel welcome on lots of different levels. And it was a Roman Catholic Mass. And as Mary David said, it was left to people on their own hearts whether they wanted to receive communion. So I chose to receive communion and was doing that. And then when I made my first profession in 2000, I was interviewed by a journalist from the paper. So this got published, and I wasn't thinking really, you know, I guess about what I said, but he asked me what was, you know, what were some of the things that I loved about this life? And I said, well, the sacramental life. Now, as a Benedictine, the sacramental life for me was larger than the sacraments. Okay, so I was thinking about how we see God in everything. Well, anyway, but it sounded like the sacramental life, of course, that's what I said. Well, the bishop read that. So I'm a Protestant participating in the sacramental life, which I was. So he wrote a letter to Mary David, because the bishop has jurisdiction over any Roman Catholic Mass in the diocese, okay? That was his one jurisdiction over us. Yeah, okay. He wrote a letter that asking that Mary David write a letter saying that I was not partaking in the Eucharist. So we talked about it, and in order for her to write the letter, I stopped participating, or stopped taking it. I was still participating in the service, but I'm just doing this quietly, and it's better not to make a big deal about it. But eventually, because this went on for maybe about a year, And people in the Sunday assembly began to notice that I wasn't receiving the communion elements. And so some people in solidarity began also not receiving. But it was okay. We were, I mean, it was lovely also to feel that solidarity. And that spurred us along as well in becoming ecumenical.
I don't think I ever wrote that letter.
Well, I think you did. I mean, I stopped. I don't know. I stopped. Okay, if not, anyway, I stopped. I thought I was. I thought I was stopping for that. Whatever. I mean, just to have integrity. That's all. Okay. This one is the battery's done.
We have more time if you're. Go ahead. We'll just go on with the next one. All right. Well, when you're curious about next steps, I'll talk about this a little later. On May 1st, we have Sunday Assembly. Right. But so there's more to come on this whole topic, is my point about that. All right, next and final question. What does it mean for you to live out your call as a Benedictine monastic?
Okay, I'll go first. I've had plenty of time to think about this. I think for me, well, I know. For me, it means putting Christ absolutely at the center of my life, of our lives, of my life. I remember when I returned to New York and I went after my 6 months here, and I went back to church, and I remember standing there in the entryway, and I thought, I just always want to be at church. I just always want to be at church. I don't want to go anywhere else. And I also experienced in New York that I lived in one borough, I worked in another borough, and my best friend was way across on the other side, and my life was so spread out. And yes, I'm sure I could have worked on that without becoming a religious sister, but it sort of represented for me this desire for like a wholeness and integration and life lived for one purpose. And I guess at the time I still quite probably didn't know exactly what that meant, but living for one purpose, living for Christ, allowing Christ to grow in me, to grow in love and to learn what that means, to live not just for myself and to have the space and support to know myself. Benedictines, we believe, and I'm sure we're not the only ones, that in order to know and love God, we must know and love ourselves. And that was a journey that I had been on for a number of years myself, but I wanted to experience that and continue that path in a religious setting. And my experience here during my 6 months as a sojourner was just so wonderful. I loved the prayers. What Lynne said, I loved working outside. I loved working in the garden. I loved the people and the hospitality. And I loved being in one place. I mean, it seems kind of odd to me, but I rarely want to go anywhere else besides our house and the monastery. I don't have much desire to go out for entertainment or those kinds of things too much. So I think that's it.
For me, the short answer is to grow and love, to grow in love and service. When I was interviewed after I made my first profession, one of the things I said was one of the reasons I wanted to come here was to grow. And then I said, and I didn't know how much I was going to grow. That's a big joke in the community because I didn't even know what I was saying. Because I don't know. I have jinxed the microphone. Okay. Oh, maybe it went out. Okay, so I wanted to grow. One of the things I discovered and value, I think it brought me here, but I wasn't aware of what it meant, was that my Christian faith cannot be just about me and God. It's not just between me and God. It needs to be. Well, but you can still hear it. Can you still hear it?
They can't hear you.
You can. Can you on Zoom hear me? Raise your hand if you can hear me. A little bit, not much. No, they can't hear.
What if we turn it off? Turn it off and turn it back on again?
Doop, 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 doop. Well, now this works.
Okay. Whatever. Give me one that works, if you would. Thank you.
I'm going to hold it.
All right. Jinx the microphones. Can you hear me on Zoom now? Not very much. Okay, they can't hear very much. Good. All right, now it's back. All right. I can hardly think now. maybe I just saying. So, all right, I'm going to pass it on.
Well, being a Benedictine changes as one grows and as one ages. So I think being a Benedictine is similar to being in community with people, whether it be 1, 2, or 10, or 100, is being open, honest, forgiving. That's sort of main things for being in relationship with yourself, with other people, and with God.
Benedictines make a promise, which we call profession, and that promise is stability, conversion of life, and obedience. And during that time, you have the opportunity to grow, as Lynne talked about it, Mary David. It's embedded sometimes in different ways in every person. For myself, it is going forward, as Benedict says, with the gospel as our guide. And that's very broad. So I look for the Jesus of the gospel in whatever the gospel is. I loved Patty's interpretation today of the people that shared the candy bar, because it reminded me of my sharing of the bread with the Lutheran ministry. The conversion of life is to grow with the community, as Mary David suggested, forgiveness, vulnerability, compassion, love, and obedience is listening to one another. It isn't just obedience to a superior. It's listening. That's what the word comes from, obedire, to listen. So those are some of the challenges that one tries to live out and live into in years in community. And I'm still working on it.
being a Benedictine has helped me to grow in my life. And I joined the Benedictine life when I was still young at the age of 20. And then I came out at a certain point after almost 10 years. And when I went back home, I was thinking, oh, I'll not go back to religious life again. I think I'm going to live my life here at home. But when I was back at home, I felt lonely. I felt I left something very precious. And when I went deep into myself, I discovered that what I missed was the community life. Because in community life, we help one another to continue with this spiritual. Now, spiritual life is a journey. So at least when you are living in community life, we lift up one another when we fall down, and we encourage one another. And I think that is the real thing which made me to start discerning again and coming back to Benedictine life. Because when I live alone, I will not know my weaknesses or my strengths unless I have somebody to point it out for me. So what I love most is the community way of life in Benedictine life. And to finish it, I have a short story to tell you about ecumenical. When I was in high school, there was this teacher who was teaching us religious education. And one day she told us to define the word ecumenical. And in my head, I knew the word ecumenical means the coming together of different religions. It was an exam, so I wrote my answer, I gave it to her, but I got it wrong. I tried, I couldn't go back to her because she was so harsh. So I said, let me remain with my wrong answer, though I knew I was correct. So it has remained in my heart until the other day I was saying, now I think I love to get it right because I'm living the life. So I think I have the right definition of ecumenism now. Thank you.
We are exactly. Can you hear?
Okay, now try. I turn this off.
We're right on time, as it happens. I don't know how that happened. But we have time for maybe a couple of questions from those gathered here. Anybody have something they'd like to ask the sisters?
On Zoom, they can put it in the chat.
Or on Zoom, you can put it in the chat. Sure.
Thank you so much for sharing your stories. The question I have has to do with, so when you were no longer canonical, are you still a part of a federation? Are you connected with other religious Benedictine communities? And what does that look like?
One of us could answer it. It's a very good question. And our federation of other member monasteries has accepted us. And we are very pleased. It took us, when Mary David said 14 years, part of those 14 years was every 3 years going to our chapter to tell them what it meant to have a Benedictine community. And when we first started a community that was ecumenical, when we first started, people would, what you talking about? And gradually, over this time, and when it came time to vote by the member monasteries of our federation, it was almost unanimous. But there were about 4 prioresses that voted no. The rest all voted yes. So we feel like we not only helped change our local area, but also other Benedictine monasteries. That's a very good question, and it's extremely important that we are in relationship. And Sister Mary David and Sister Lynne, and they go to the chapter every 3 years.
Yes, and also we then we worked with a canon lawyer, a monk from St. John's, a civil lawyer and a canon lawyer, for 14 years and worked it through our federation. So we are not an isolated group. And so we're an affiliated ecumenical community of the Federation of St. Gertrude, meaning we can't vote on canonical issues or hold any kind of canonical thing. And we say, that's fine with us.
I just want to tell one brief story about our dearly beloved Bishop, Bishop Morlino, of blessed memory. Anyway, after we told him, we invited him, we wanted him to be a part of it, and on and on and on. But after the sisters told him we were going to be ecumenical and left his office, he called in his canon lawyer and said, see if they did it correctly or if I can change it. But the canon lawyer was a student at St. John's of our canon lawyer. Now, I don't mean that vengefully. I really don't. It was simply is the truth.
It was very good to have two bishops that did not like us very well, because it prepared us to hang on for what we believed in and to make the sacrifice that is needed, not only to keep this property from being usurped by the diocese, but our whole ecumenical mission that we feel strongly about.
The people on Zoom can't hear us unless we use a mic. That's why we need to use a mic.
Now that you've been successful with,
Just hold it close to your mouth. Close to your mouth.
now that you've been successful with coming apart and creating this new entity, has any of your other communities that you know of, have they thought about it, been successful? Did it plant the seed for others to become ecumenical?
There is certainly an openness to ecumenism by them, but I think Benedictines don't set out so much and plan a course of action, but they try to discern the work of the Spirit that evolves in them and among them. And our being ecumenical did not happen because we drew up a 10 or 20-year plan. It happened because of the circumstances. I thought this morning when I was thinking about this, our proximity to the University of Wisconsin. It was the campus workers that I went to Montgomery, Alabama with. The Taizé brothers that were on campus at the University of Wisconsin. And so some of these things unfurl, or what should I say, just organically unfold. And that's how we felt God was leading us. We never set out to do that.
We did give all of our papers to a small community in Martin, Kentucky that work with the miners, and they did their process in 4 years because we just simply gave it to them what we did. So there is one small community. But I think there are a lot of communities that are looking at that. But, of course, there's just recently a couple articles about sisters who, as you know, are not having lots of women join their communities no matter what they do. Some of them said, yes, it's the people who went through Vatican II that are really the generation that were pushing the boundaries and see that this is the important thing. Since Vatican II, and since there were a number of years that was sort of backtracking and trying to go back to Vatican II, there's been generations that have missed that. in the Roman Catholic Church. So we wait for the generation that's ready.
I see a question, two questions on the chat. One from Lisa, what is a federation? And I'll say my understanding of federation is it's an organization of, our federation is about 13 monasteries now, 14 monasteries. So it's a group of monasteries. There are 3 federations in North America. So does that answer your question, Lisa? Yes. Okay, the next question is from Alyssa. I wonder about ongoing interfaith work, including Jews, Muslims, etc.
In our experimental time, we did have a small group of people. That one was Jewish, to a household that was United Church of Christ, and what was Parker? Quaker. And they were married and single, and Joanne and I, in those early years. And after being together for 5 years, we said, we don't think we can continue, because one of the couples decided to have a divorce, and we said, oh, Lordy, save us. This is, we don't know how this is all going to go. We're going to drop that experiment, when a couple of the other people went out, said that was what we needed to do. So,
And diversity is welcome, but if there is so much diversity that it's difficult to come together around a common vision, it makes community more challenging.
In terms of our work right now, you may know, this is pre-COVID, there are many Buddhist groups that come here on retreat because they resonate with the silence and with a contemplative space. So they're not in our community, but this whole place, the monastery, is open to people of diverse religious expressions or none. You know, they just resonate these days. People need silence and the contemplative, whether or not they know that word. And the land is a big draw. We find it a place, I mean, it's spiritual, okay? It's God's first expression of who God is. And people can meet God there whether or not we have the same name for God.
Rabbi Zworzynski was a great religious leader in Madison. Some years ago, he was part of that interfaith group that met here. In fact, he belonged to Rotary, and they have the Rabbi Zworzynski Award that we received because of our outreach to members of other religions. So it's not that we know how to put all these things together. Those are just the experiences that we had in our journey to become who we are now. We hope we continue to change with the Spirit's help.
And with that, we come to the end of our time this morning. The sisters are really the heartbeat of this community, and we thank you for taking time out of your Sunday to be with us and share your thoughts and your feelings. And so I'd like to invite everybody, and at home you can clap loudly as well. Give you a round of applause and appreciation for all you've given. Thank you so much. Our journey through Holy Wisdom continues on Sunday, May 1st. I've mentioned earlier, we'll have what sounds like it'll be a continuation of this a little bit, an overview of how the Sunday Assembly developed and the many roles our members play in the liturgy each week. So you can watch your email for details and how to register. And meanwhile, thank you again for joining us and spending some time today, and enjoy your Sunday. Yeah. I think it there are or were sheets on the